we have Croda here on board. I hope a lot of you have heard of him before. If you've ever seen my streams, you know who Croda is. He doesn't only like to gift subs in our stream, but he also has a blog called Markets for ISK. In this blog, he talks a little bit about trading, but also about CCP and Pearl Abyss financials, kind of like I do. Thank you, Croda, for posting that in chat. And so we share a passion for CCP and Pearl Abyss financials to analyze it, to see how the game EVE Online is doing that we all like to play. And so today we're going to pour over the consolidated financial statements, which is something that Pearl Abyss Iceland, as CCP is called over there, as we will see in a second, that they have to report once a year, typically in late April or early May, and they came out this week. And so we're going to go through these statements. We're going to see what we can infer from them. And then after that, we're going to have a discussion and open it up for questions and everything. Before we jump in, I want to, for everyone also in the YouTube world out there watching this later, and or people that are already bored by financial content, let me just sum up like the 4 or 5 biggest points for you guys, just in case you want to turn off, right? So overall, revenue is up 8%. Okay, so CCP overall has made more revenue in 2024 than in 2023. That's a good thing. In 2023, they had lost 18 million US dollars. Some of you will remember from our stream, they have lost 19 million now. So yes, more revenue, but also the loss is the same or even bigger than last year. And we will see in a second why that is. Third, their cash position, so the cash on hand, went down from 33 million to 13 million. So the cash on hand is now less than the loss that they're making a year, which means they will need some sort of loan or cash injection. We'll also talk about that. Interestingly, though, also the Plex reserves, we can see how much Plex is out there based on the deferred revenue they have on their balance sheet. And so even though CCP has been deliberately trying to drive down Plex stock prices with these insane sales that they have going on, Plex reserves, or the outstanding Plex at the end of 2024, was higher than the end of 2023, which is a big one. And then there's some other stuff we're going to talk about. So those are the big overarching conclusions that we're drawing from this. But let's jump into the report and let's see what the numbers actually say. And I'm going to have this. This is a PDF. So guys, again, for my basement dwelling friends, this is white, and it's going to be white. Otherwise, we also won't be able to read it very well. So we're. I want to start with the endorsement by the board of directors. All right. So typically, these financial statements always start with a letter from the board of directors, kind of explaining what you're about to read in this. And I want to highlight this first paragraph here. It says, in 2024, the group generated revenues of 60 million US dollars compared to 56 million US dollars in the previous year. Notably, game revenue increased by 4.5 million or 8% year on year, reflecting strong ongoing engagement across EVE Online and the launch of new titles, including EVE Galaxy Conquest. However, the company reports a net loss of 19.5 million US dollars compared to a 18.8 million US dollar loss in 2023. This result is primarily due to deliberate and increased investment in multiple active development projects, including EVE Frontier, EVE Vanguard, and Carbon open source platform, which are scheduled to enter key release phases from 2025 onwards. Translating that, I mean, it's fairly straightforward, but translating that is, yes, they made a loss, but this loss is because they are investing heavily in EVE Frontier, EVE Vanguard, and the Carbon platform. That's the gist of what they're saying. And if you're looking at the current revenues, which are mostly EVE Online, it's up 8%. So that's first of all good. Croda has I don't know if you made this, or I think you got it from the annual report of Pearl Abyss, right? But Croda has brought a a corp chart here that he sent me to before, which is not as easy to read, but it's just an explanation of the corporate structure of Pearl Abyss, just in case you wondered. Croda, first of all, what can we see here, and where did you find this?
So this is from the report and accounts of Pearl Abyss itself, based in Korea. And what it really shows you is sort of the corporate structure as far as CCP, EVE Online is concerned. So that you see that grey box CCP EHF, that is the business in Iceland, and that is what we would have been talking about only before 2018. And beneath it, you can see all the little subsidiaries it owns. And when we talk about a company, any company in the world, we don't actually talk about the single company. We talk about the group. We aggregate everything together and we say, this are the revenues of CCP. And the revenues of CCP will be the revenues of CCP itself plus all its subsidiaries underneath. Now, the issue we have is CCP itself doesn't aggregate everything and report under CCP. It's Pearl Abyss Iceland, which is one step up, that aggregates everything. And so we look at the results of Pearl Abyss Iceland. And when we do that, we will therefore get the results of EVE Online, the game, and everything else they do. So all the work they're doing to EVE Frontier, Project Awakening, etc., etc. But we this is sort of the structure we found in the report and account. So it's the easiest way to talk about it. So just hold this structure in your mind, because when we talk about the loss that Pearl Abyss makes them $20 million, it is obviously the profits of EVE Online, the game, plus all the work they do in all these subsidiaries that you see.
Yeah, and we see the ominous Angelus Prime Foundation there in yellow, which Nosy Gamer called out in his blog last year already, which is interesting to say the least. Let's just say they're incorporated in Panama, and we'll talk about some of the details later. Great. So let's jump into each of the points that we mentioned earlier. So if we go and look at the statement of income, all right. So we're seeing revenues are up. They're up 8% in 2023. Game revenues were about 56 million. Now they're over 60 million. Part of that, certainly, it was a year with inflation, right? But most of this comes from their game revenue. So it's Plex sales and Omega sales. That's a good sign, right? I mean, we saw more players in 2024 than in 2023. Certainly, 2023 was a low point, but overall, raising the revenue associated with a relative older game is a very good sign, right, Croda?
Yeah, no. So game revenue up 13%. They didn't put a subscription price on, so you can say it's a bit of mix. Perhaps people buying 1 month instead of 3 months, but essentially, I think we can assume that paying player accounts must have gone up by 13% to make this work. So and 20 years into a game, that is fantastic.
Yeah. We then have the cost of sales. The cost of sales in terms of game development is typically platform fees, so stuff they pay Steam, or distribution fees that they they have to sell the game. So they're costs that are not directly associated with developing the game, and so those are up significantly. But I don't think we have a way of knowing what exactly is in there. Or did you do an analysis, Croda? Do you know why it's up a million?
I think. Yeah, because when they say revenues are 60 million, that's actually 55 million for essentially the game, and then they have a license fee to NetEase of 5 million. So I think about 10% of the game revenues are spent just running the game. Therefore 55 million. And to put that 55 million in context, that is what they did in the pandemic year 2020. So they're back up to pandemic year. The record was back in, I think, 2013 when they did 70 million. So they've got a long way to go to get back to where they were, but they are going in the right direction, which is good news.
Yes, if they get there. But also, this is already a success. For those of you wondering, NetEase NetEase here is never mentioned by name, by the way, in the statement, but it is mentioned that their biggest customer is one customer paying $5 million US to them, and that is NetEase. NetEase is doing the distribution and the running of EVE Online in China, as well as EVE Echoes, and so their relationship with NetEase is very significant, and it represents a definite an opportunity in the Chinese market, but it's also a risk as their biggest partner, so to speak. But they never mention them in the text. So if you're wondering who the big customer is that they're working with, it's always NetEase. Also, when they talk about royalties and licensing fees, as Croda just mentioned, that's always NetEase in China. Do you have anything to add, Croda?
No, the only thing I'll say just on revenues is North America, so that'll mostly be the US, but of course Canada is half of the revenues. Now that has always been the case. What is interesting is Europe, as you know, where all the paying players base. Europe is falling. It's not as big a proportion of revenues as it was, and it's Asia that's beginning to sort of take, if you like, market share.
Yeah, I pulled it up in the background here, so you can see that all regions grow in absolute terms, right?
Yep, but Europe over the years, Europe is becoming a smaller proportion of the total revenues, and it's Asia that's becoming more and more over time, whereas North America is holding its own at half the business.
Yeah, that would be then including China, though, right? So if you see here, this is the breakdown that I mentioned earlier. So this is royalties and licenses. So interestingly, though, NetEase revenue, or presumably this is all NetEase, right? Because down here they mention that the revenues from one customer represented 5.1 million, which is the exact same number as this one for royalties and licenses. Yep. So presumably NetEase revenue went down 2 million, and I don't think that is EVE Online. That's probably EVE Echoes revenue, right? But we don't know that.
I'm pretty sure it is, because their actual revenues into Asia itself sort of went up slightly, and I can't believe that's Australia and Singapore.
Right.
So I think that's EVE Echoes in that line there. Yeah.
So going back to the statement of income, if we look at the bottom here, it says the loss. So last year they had a loss of 18.8 million, and now they have a loss of 19.4 million. And why is that? So game revenues are up, but if you look at this number right here, is the research and development that is also very high and up significantly. Now, research and development just means not only new titles, but it's also existing titles. So there's no way for us to break down how much money are they spending on EVE Online and how much money are they spending on EVE Frontier or the Carbon engine, which is overarching, or EVE Vanguard. So for us, this just means that, okay, they're spending a lot of money developing new stuff. One way to look at this is with revenues of 60 million and a loss of 20 million, that would mean that for EVE Online to break even, they would have to spend 20 million of the R&D cost on new stuff that is not EVE Online. So let's say EVE Frontier and EVE Vanguard mainly, right? Is that realistic? I don't know. It's at least close. Like, it's at least in the realm where I could imagine that EVE Online on its own is quite profitable if they didn't develop new things. Because looking at that, it would be, is maybe 1/3 or 30 to 40% of the company working on new stuff. Yeah, I could imagine. If you look at the London office and the Shanghai office and the Frontier team in Reykjavik, I guess that would be realistic, right, Croda?
Yeah, Yeah, or you can approach it from the other direction, and you have to assume EVE Online itself is highly profitable. So otherwise, why continue? So EVE Online, 55 million of revenues, call it 50 million after gross sort of cost of sales. What do we think that 50 turns into? And therefore work backwards and sort of say, well, the 20 million loss, probably. I reckon EVE Online must make 10 million. We know where half the loss goes. This Angelis Foundation, which we'll pick up later, which we think is EVE Frontiers, I think is 10 million cost a year straight away.
Yeah, it's strange because this Angelis Prime Foundation, that was the name, right? What was it?
Angelis.
Angelis Prime Foundation, that is incorporated in Panama. If you Google it, there's a contractual relationship in that they buy or sell services to CCP, but it's not owned by CCP. So if it's kind of a strange connection. The only connection that you are able to make between EVE Online or EVE in general, the EVE universe, and this foundation is that yes, it's mentioned in these accounts, but also Angelis Prime is like an old system that was in a trailer for EVE Online that never made it into live. If you want to read about it, there's an interesting article by Nosy Gamer when he goes over the 2024 numbers of Pearl Abyss. So it's interesting, but yes, I presume you're right, Croda, in that we can attribute at least 10 million of these losses to EVE Frontier, which wouldn't be strange. I mean, that's at least what goes into there. It's probably more than that. So revenues are up, but there is a loss, just like last year. So in total, in the last 2 years, they've Pearl Abyss has basically had to inject 40 million into CCP of their own money, because in the end, it's Pearl Abyss who's responsible for this loss, right? They have to carry this, and in addition to the price they already paid for CCP many years ago, they're not going to be happy, right? Correct?
No, I mean you can say. I mean, this is the A16Z. They put $40 million in to sort of work on that, and that landed. I'm pretty sure that landed pretty swiftly on the CCP balance sheet.
Yep.
If you look since 2018, when Pearl Abyss bought CCP, CCP made a profit in the first year, and have then essentially been loss making every year, and they've lost about $56 million since then. So they bought CCP for about 226 million. CCP itself has then lost 56 million, and they took a 50 million write down a couple of years ago. So I don't think this was the plan of Pearl Abyss. And I suspect the only way Pearl Abyss can tolerate this is if EVE Online itself is profitable. Otherwise, they'd just give up and shut it down.
But yeah, and on the other hand, it's a video game company, so they're so you have to assume that all of the new developments are aligned with Pearl Abyss. They will have to green light any new games that they develop, and so I think it's a collective hope that is just pinned on EVE Frontier and EVE Vanguard to make them profitable again, because EVE Online is never going to be strong enough to fund the development of 2 additional games on the site. There's no way. And I agree with you. I don't know if that EVE Online plus number, I don't know if it's 10 million, but there's certainly a 7-figure number left over if you just run EVE Online, for sure, in the current structure.
Yeah. If it was just EVE Online, they'd have to have smaller offices and a lot less. I mean, we know in CCP in Iceland has about 173 employees, and then they've got all the other sort of the rest of the 400 employees are spread around the world. I mean, if this was just EVE Online, it would be a much smaller set of businesses, probably just based in Iceland as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and for those of you wondering, the A16Z is a venture capital firm that invested 40 million into that, basically handed over 40 million for EVE Online for CCP to develop EVE Frontier, a blockchain-based survival MMO. Even though they're scratching the name blockchain from that description, I think. So that's 40 million, but that's also 40 million is over very, very quickly if you look at the financial statements and you look at how much effort is put into EVE Frontier. Let's look at the balance sheet. So on the balance sheets where you see assets and liabilities, I want to talk specifically about one line, and that is let's see, deferred revenue down here. Okay, so current liabilities, deferred revenue is Omega and Plex, and we have a way of breaking that down. Let's look at page 30 here. Let's see. Hold on, gotta go down to page 30 for that breakdown. So this is the breakdown of the deferred revenue. And deferred revenue just means that they have received cash, but they still have a service to do, to deliver. And so they owe this to the players. So they have to put it on as a liability on their balance sheet. And so you can see that the top line is subscriptions, which is 3.5 million of Omega time that players have bought, but that players haven't used up yet. And you can see that from 2023 to 2024, that number is nearly identical. So the number of outstanding Omega month, to put it in simple terms, is about the same. Although Croda on his blog makes an assumption there that since subscription price went up, the number of month here is lower. That's what your point was, Croda, on your blog, right?
Yeah, I think last year, obviously, there's no change in subscription price, but if the number of players, I think, went up by 13%, right, but that subscription is flat, then the average sort of Omegas, if you like, outstanding per player has to be down.
Yeah, the subscription price increase was June 22. Yeah. And so if we have more players, then we have fewer months there. But basically unchanged. The more interesting number to me is the second one, which is in-game purchases not yet consumed, and that is Plex. So that is when people buy Plex, even though you can't sell Plex back to CCP, accounting rules, they make CCP report it as a liability because it's not used up yet. So digital currency is just funny in that way. Even though you can't sell it back, it's not reported as revenue, and that's why they have to report it as deferred revenue. If you had asked me, did I think this number was going down or up, I would have said it's definitely going down, because last year they did a lot of these New Eden Store sales that were specifically there for people to use up their Plex and reduce their Plex stockpiles. Now, we all know that the availability of Plex is much, much lower now than it used to be. I mean, Plex prices are going up. There isn't a lot of Plex, and I assumed this was because people aren't buying as much Plex as before. But if you look at the number of outstanding Plex combined with the number of Plex people are spending on New Eden stores, then this is very, very, very good news for CCP, because this means that people are still buying a lot of Plex. Right? There's 10% more Plex out there at the end of 2024 than there's at 2023, even though people were spending a lot of Plex. And that's how you can now see why CCP is making 8% more revenue, because this is very, very, very good news for them. Croda.
Well, I mean, so what this means is that we've always looked at game revenue as being correlated with paying player account numbers. Now, obviously, there'll be two lines in game revenue. There'll be the subscription, and then there'll be anything you're spending on the store, either real money, or you're buying Plex to do it. And we don't know, but we can see the volume of Plex and the sales that have been happening for the last 2 or 3 years. So I think, I mean, when I sort of say I think player numbers are up 13%, I might be overstating. It could be up less. And actually, what's happening is you've got more Plex sales as a proportion of total revenue. But we don't know that. That is pure speculation. But I think directionally it's probably correct.
Interestingly, we also have 37.5 million of token warrants here, and this is it's rather complex, Croda. These are warrants that CCP sold to someone. I don't know if it's A16Z, but it's basically a warrant so to buy a token on the blockchain at some point in the future, crypto tokens. Presumably this is then Eve coin that is used in Eve Frontier, correct?
Yeah, that's exactly correct. So that 37.5 million was made up in two amounts: 27.5 million last year and 10 million the year before. And I think it's too coincidental that it's close to 40 million. So I think it is part of the A16Z investment, and that's how the cash comes onto the CCP balance sheet.
Yeah. Sentence in chat is saying 3.4 million subs per year, so 15k subs per. No, this is just the outstanding. This is just the outstanding number of. This is not the amount of money they make from subscription. This is just how many Omega month dollars were outstanding at the end of the year. Sorry, Croda, I interrupted you.
No, you're exactly right there. The only thing I'll say about the 40 million is the report accounts, not this one or maybe the CCP ones, do actually tell us what the total loss of Angeles Prime is, which if we think, let's say A16Z, and it is now 40 million. In other words, they have spent everything. So that would suggest if A16Z want to stick with this, then they'll have to put in more money this year. So maybe this time last year, when we look at the report and accounts, we will see another sort of set of tokens sold and cash come in.
Yeah, and they can't really back out because they have these token warrants, right? So they're completely reliant on the game going live and these tokens being worth more than they have bought them for, right?
Yep. Or A16C just go, actually look, let's cut it out. Let's call it a day. But no, I've not heard any hint of that, to be honest.
For them, 40 million is peanuts. But you could see that happening. It's although I'm sure in this situation right now where they're getting close to releasing something, I'm sure everyone's gonna just wait to see how successful eFrontier is. I mean, one thing we can say. Go ahead.
I was just saying, I think in the report accounts right at the front, they sort of said middle of this year they're going to start to release a lot of this stuff. So
yeah, it's going to enter significant release stages, whatever that means. It's interesting though. I mean, one thing we can say is that there is so much riding on Eve Frontier and Eve Vanguard to actually make revenue or actually drive revenue that I'm a bit concerned, because I think with Eve Vanguard, I don't see the revenue potential with Eve Vanguard. I have to be honest. Like I always see it as kind of like an add-on to Eve Online, and I don't see it. I'm assuming that in order to play Vanguard, you would have to go Omega then, like it is now, and that's just going to be increased revenue for Eve Online. But I don't think it's going to be a massive cash cow. And then Eve Frontier is just a huge gamble. Like it's a huge gamble on people buying into that idea, right? So it's to me, it's for CCP or for Pearl Abyss, next year is a massive make or break year to see if this model that they're driving can be successful. Croda?
Yeah. And what we do know is that Eve Online has got about 13 million cash left. They will certainly need more than that this year. But the auditors will not let them put out a set of report and accounts like this without some sort of proof or evidence that they will get cash from elsewhere, assuming they do need more cash, which I think they do. So either the auditors have got a sort of a guarantee from Pearl Abyss that they'll give them more cash, or they can see more cash coming in from A16Z. So next year will be make or break year, but I'm pretty sure this time next year we will still be talking about EVE Online. It will still be here, so don't panic.
EVE Online will still be here, and probably the other two will both be delayed. That's typically how things go in game development. Cash at the end of year, this is the number you're referring to and that I mentioned earlier. We had 32 million US dollars at the end of 2023, and that is down to 13 million. And now, cash is just one thing, right? Cash, clearly, it's better to have cash than not cash. But CCP has many ways to raise cash. They could get additional investments from A16Z, for example. They could get a cash injection from Pearl Abyss. They could take out a loan, and with their history, this is not a question of are they able to get the cash. It's more a question of how expensive is a cash going to be, right? I mean, this is, as you say, this is not an existential crisis here.
Yeah, so they've got 13 million cash, but they also have a 50 million loan from Pearl Abyss. So actually their net debt is about 37 million. A16Z will not give them cash to fund non-A16Z business. So, the only reason A16Z will give them cash is if EVE Online itself is profitable. So all sort of anecdotal evidence we have suggests that EVE Online itself is highly profitable. The only other thing I'll sort of say is don't ignore the fact that North America is half the revenues, because that is obviously, I'm guessing, US dollar revenue, and the US dollar is going down at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And all their costs are essentially in Iceland, the UK, and Asia. In other words, sort of more euro, sort of effectively dominated. So there will be a lot of FX movements, and I do not think they want to see the dollar go down. So tariffs, etc., having all that disruption.
No, and they show the risk of currency fluctuations in their statements here later on, but that is just based on their cash holdings and not on revenues. And on revenues, I'm totally with you. Like if the dollar drops 10%, which it already has, right? It has already shown that is a real threat. Then we're going to see 10 million in revenues drop to 9 million in the currency of their expenses, and that is something that they just simply can't afford. So, that's something that is out of their control, but it's something that comes with the territory of relying on North American revenues.
Yeah, so every sort of 10% of dollar drops their revenue line by 5%.
Yeah,
and that goes straight to the bottom line.
One big chunk here that I don't want to ignore is their government grants. I mean, 6 million in government grants as other income. That's just straight up subsidies, right?
Yeah, so that's been going on since the dawn of time. And the CCP accounts themselves say 2 million. So at least 2 million is coming in from Iceland. And I guess the rest from either Iceland or other countries like the UK. So, I mean, countries like the UK will subsidize sort of things like film and computer gaming. But yes, it means we've had 6 million a year forever. So I think it's quite reliable. But again, it's literally 10% of revenue, so it is quite useful.
Yeah,
and it's when I say 10% of revenues, they get 60 million of revenues in plus this 6 million of government grants.
Yeah, Futility in chat is saying all those other currencies are also going down. Well, no, I mean, for example, the just since the beginning of the year, the dollar has lost about 10% versus the euro, right, and against the pound as well. So I think it's right now it's a dollar problem because there's massive instability in the US dollar, and while they're reporting in US dollars here, as you say, most of the costs, Croda, are R&D costs in Iceland, which is in Krona, and in London, which is pounds. Yeah, so those are the main points that I wanted to cover today. I know, Croda, you in your blog, let me just show it here. This is Croda's blog, and he has part 1 and 2 of this. Croda, feel free to link this in chat again if you want to. Croda goes into a lot more detail out here than we have done in this overview. Croda, is there anything else you want to mention from your blog or otherwise?
I think question will are we due another impairment? Possibly. I mean,
Yep.
because I think they're still making more losses than perhaps Abyss will stomach. But again, it goes down to what is the profitability of EVE Online. The only other thing is it's a real well two things to sort of say is because it's a quoted company, they have to tell you what the total salary of all the board of the directors was. And the board of directors of Abyss Iceland is basically most of them are South Korean, and then there's obviously Hilmar, and I think there's one other person, but I think it's Hilmar. Now, you will not be paying the South Koreans out of Abyss Iceland. So I think, tucked away in the report and accounts for anybody to find if they want to is probably Hilmar's salary, if you're interested. And then the only other thing, which is a completely noddy thing, is they also tell you what they pay the auditors. And when I let me just get down to it myself.
I can probably find it here for you.
2 seconds. Yeah, so they pay the auditors about 250 million, 260 million to audit the company. That is fine.
Thousand, right?
But then you've got a
1,000.
line called other services, and that is basically anything that's not audit. And it's always quite interesting to see what happens if that, which has happened right now, has doubled. The auditors have done some additional work for this company over the year, and you always ask yourself, what could that be? I don't know. But it is interesting. And then the other interesting line about the auditor fees is they charge about 30,000 for the review of interim financial statements. Now, we don't see these interim financial statements, but it's quite interesting that some exist. So, we could be having this conversation every 6 months if we could get hold of those interim financial. And why on earth would the auditors look at the interim financial statements? I guess it's on behalf of Abyss, because they would see
Yeah.
them. But
Well,
that
I
sort of
mean,
doubling of other services is quite interesting. So again, Oz, you have to corner some of these devs and give them a pint and find out what is going on with some of this stuff.
I think a lot of the devs are now watching and learning about all of this for the first time. There is an interesting thing about tokens in here about we talked about that last year as well, but about the employee token incentive plan. Did you have a look at that, or like?
I looked at it quite closely last year, and I think this is sort of almost a way of paying people in CCP shares. You sort of pay them with these tokens, and if say Eve Frontier works, then the employees will get a bit of a kicker in
Yeah.
their salary.
But
That's
it's
the only way.
it's the same crypto token that they're selling warrants to A16Z, right?
I think it must be.
I
So
think
this
it's,
is if Eve Frontier works, then they're all sort of joined in.
yeah. And then they're mentioning other crypto assets that they're holding, but they're saying they're holding the other crypto assets for business purposes. So, for example, for use in Eve Frontier and et cetera, et cetera.
Yes, I'm assuming they might accept payment for EVE Online subscription in Ethereum or Bitcoin for all I know, but I think it's more to do with EVE
Yeah,
Frontier.
I mean they need to hold it so they can test it, so they can there's a lot of reasons why they would be holding Ethereum, for example, because that's what they're basing EVE Frontier on, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I saw you in your blog. You have the 6-year view on revenue, and this is what you were referring to earlier. And in terms of revenue, yeah, it's up 8%. We're not quite 2020 2021 levels yet, right?
Yeah, because what the revenue is two things, of course. It's the EVE Online revenue and EVE Echoes and stuff, but it's also this NetEase. And NetEase used to be 10 million. So the underlying EVE Online game revenue is 55 million 2024, and that's what it got to in 2021 as well. The reason I put this chart there is to look at what's called EBITDA, which is earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, and amortization. That is a very common metric that people look at.
Mm-hmm.
And you can sort of see that since CCP was bought by Abyss, well, they made a profit in 2020. And then it's been losses ever since. And then obviously the way we get from 12 million to 20 million is the interest, the tax, depreciation, amortization.
Yeah. There's
But the other thing, of course, is will they put up subscription prices this year again? I don't know. Let's
no
see.
way. No way they cannot. They cannot. It's just too much. It's just too much. In terms of headcount, I think that's something we didn't expressly mention. So the number of employees we see in here, it's 400 average positions is 408
Yeah.
or
So if
something.
you if you if you go onto my blog on one of the posts, I've sort of charted it down. How many employees? It's 402. It was 382 last year, and it was back in 2019 it was 279. So the number of employees has been going up. If you scroll down, keep on scrolling down,
Down, down, down.
down, yeah, down. That's up. Go down. There's a
There's
sort
a
of an
slight
Excel.
delay. Yeah, this right here, right?
Yeah, there we are.
Yeah. And so the number of staff has continuously increased, which you would expect if they're developing new stuff, right? But if you look at, let's say 2020 is where maybe it was just EVE Online, so we say like the 270 300 is maybe more to their EVE Online staff, and adding 25%, and then moving some over from away from EVE Online to the new properties, then you get, maybe with some fantasy, you get to 30-40% of the R&D costs going into new projects, which would then make EVE Online profitable.
Yeah, that's a good way of looking at it. Find a year when it was just EVE Online, and let's sort of go from there.
Yeah.
I can't leave my politics at the door. The one thing this chart also shows is that when CCP employs somebody, they have to pay an extra 15% of that individual's salary to cover things like taxes and all of this. So if you just looked at the salary of the EVE Online employees, it's about 45% of revenue. But if you then add on everything else, you get to 60% of revenues comes from employee costs.
Yeah,
It costs money to hire people. It's an expensive business.
absolutely.
Countries
No,
don't help
absolutely.
themselves by doing this.
And then, well, I mean, it's a question of the social framework that you have in societies, and those I would say extra costs of hiring and employment security are just very high, because the things like retirement insurance and unemployment insurance is something that is obviously very strong in Scandinavian countries, and including Iceland. So
Yeah, and
um
an increasing sort of requirement. Governments are forcing companies to contribute to employee
yeah,
pension schemes.
yep. Cool. So about 400 people, 400 people making a 20 million loss, but increasing revenues. That's to sum it up. Having said that, I think that concludes our normal quote unquote run through of this. I would today's stream is going to be a little bit shorter, just because I have some obligations to attend to. But I know. Let me see if, for one, if there's questions, and two, if somebody, I know there were a few CSMs earlier that wanted to join the conversation. So if anyone who wants to come into the chat to discuss with us on air, you can just go to the public voice channel on our Discord, and I'll pull you in. Thanks, Morningstar.
The other thing, Oz, is without fail every year for the last few years, these results have come out on the 30th of April. This time they were delayed a few days. I wonder if they just did not want this coming out during FanFest. The last thing you want is the entire hall wandering around going, "No, you've made another 20 million loss. How's this going to work?"
Yeah, I mean, possibly. I think 99% of the player base just doesn't really care about the financials, and so I mean, you know, but it's possible. It's possible that they at FanFest they always have investors there as well. So last year there was a bunch of crypto investors walking around, trying to talk to people, and I know for a fact that they have an investor conference going on simultaneously, I think. So that's possibly even more of a reason, the investor conference around FanFest.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Let me look at some questions in chat. How much loss would it take for Pearl Abyss to consider dumping CCP? Well, I mean, they've invested a lot of money. They've bought the company. They funded losses, as Croda outlined earlier. So abandoning it now would be terrible, a terrible signal for Pearl Abyss, right? Because they've been basically funding the developments, and now they want to reap the benefits. I think Pearl Abyss is going to definitely wait for Eve Frontier to come out and for Frontier and Vanguard to come out, and then if that doesn't turn it around as they expected, then I would think that they will seriously consider selling CCP. Another question is, and Croda, you just jump in if you want to say something.
I mean, if Pearl Abyss will not stomach EVE Online being loss-making itself, so no. I think EVE Online is profitable. What they might do is they go, right, this is ridiculous. All these new ventures are not going to make money. Not going to make money anytime soon. Shut them down. Deconsolidate the business back to EVE Online, and then we'll sell you as a going concern to somebody else who's interested.
80% or Anorax is saying, if EVE Frontier and Vanguard do poorly, what would be the consequences for EVE Online? I think that
the only thing I'll say there, Oz, is if you can separate out EVE Frontier and Vanguard, etc., so you can physically sort of, unfortunately lay off the employees and your premises aren't too big, then there should be no consequences for EVE Online at all. You just have a smaller business with less employees. So the only thing that might happen is Pearl Abyss might sort of think, let's try and get some money back by selling what is left of CCP, in other words, EVE Online, to somebody else.
I think that I mean, they certainly have the Carbon engine, which they're putting a lot of development time into and is applicable to various ones, but various games. But that's also open source, right? So that's kind of more complex. I do think that EVE Online at its core, and we've covered that, at length today, is profitable. And so as long as you have that, as long as you can focus on EVE Online, I think you're always going to find somebody to invest in. Would either Oz or Croda, would we buy CCP if we were investors? In its current state, I wouldn't invest in CCP just because I have so many question marks with EVE Frontier and EVE Vanguard. As I said, I don't see how they could make those profitable. And so I think if CCP was solely focused on EVE Online, then I would consider it. Croda, would you invest in CCP right now?
You are, as you sort of say, so many question marks on Frontier and Vanguard. The EVE Online itself is probably a very steady cash generator. In other words, it's got bond-like characteristics. And therefore, you would sort of value the after-tax earnings on anywhere between 20 to 15 times. So whatever the after-tax earnings of EVE Online is, multiply that by 15 to 20 times, that's probably the value people would be willing to pay.
Yeah, and in that scenario, I would, without the new properties. But yeah, it's a good question. Thank you, Morningstar. How lean could CCP run EVE, though, if it's consolidated? Would they have to stop making expansions? Not the current type of expansions, I think. I think they could run EVE profitably in its current form, I think. Definitely.
I mean, we've always been slightly concerned that in the Pearl Abyss announcements themselves, they always call the EVE Online player base very loyal. And we've always thought, oh, great, they're just going to put up the price of the subs, etc., etc. Actually, the way they are monetizing the EVE Online player base, so taking more of our wallet, is through the Plex sales and stuff like that. So they are sort of putting up the subs if you think about it that way round. How many games do you know that have still got revenues of 55 million after 20 years? Well, there's World of Warcraft, obviously, and there's a few others. So I think this is quite a unique property. It's quite a unique asset, and I think it can go for a while longer. There is a picture that they put out of all these people on a bus on FanFest going out somewhere. What was the average age on that bus? I'd say about 45 or something.
At least, Croda, at least. Probably closer to 50. Yeah. Yeah. It's as Futility is saying in chat, Eve needs more new subscribers. I mean, if they can show, and I'm sure they're showing, some of these numbers to their investors, but if they can show that new players are still joining Eve in droves, which, that's a question of definition, then that would always be a good sign for the future. But that's a big question mark right now, whether Eve is capable of still pulling in new players at large numbers, because most of the value is the very loyal player base. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, they will have a churn number, so they will lose a percentage of players every year. Death, for example, is a good one. And maybe it's 5% every year they will always lose. And then they'll have to sort of think about the average number of accounts per player that moves. So they probably have to get 5 to 10% new players every year just to stand still.
I like J555's comments that then if that's true, in 15 years we might have a spike in player hours when we all retire. Yeah. It's for some of us it's earlier, for some of us it's later. 55 million gross profit EVE alone, or is it Black Desert? No, Vidley, this is only EVE Online. Today we're talking only CCP and not anything Pearl Abyss, so no Black Desert at all today. This is only CCP. Cool. Then I think Croda will wrap up the discussion. Again, everyone, if you want to read up more detail on this, you can go to Croda's blog, which I'm sure we'll post again in chat. And then you can also just join our Discord. If you on our Discord, all these people that you see in chat and Croda and we're all discussing these topics all the time. So just come join our Discord and keep the discussion going. I'll put this up for YouTube as well, of course, as always. And so, we'll be returning to the regular stream. But an MAR came out, and typically we run the Oz report. I simply don't have time to do those today. So we're going to be covering the MER next week. And then the Oz report is just not going to happen this week. So that's just because I have to gather my things and my family, and we're going up the coast right now.